You know what goes down here. We break the narrative. We give you news that is not disseminated from an office in Langley. I am joined today once again by the amazing Sharina Schward, award-winning journalist Whitney Webb from MintPress News. Whitney, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me back on.
Oh, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for doing the work that you have been. Oh, well, I guess since my almost figured out that you were writing, but especially lately, and specifically on Jeffrey Epstein and what we learned about. What we learned about the process throughout parts one and two of your series just fucking exploded people's heads. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's good, I guess, because it's not exactly the kind of information that you would expect people to be like, oh, that's interesting too. And ideally, people would get a little riled up because it's freaking horrible. So,
I have had people at one of my jobs, and I live in a small town. There's one stop sign. It's a like predominantly white community that's been invaded by the tech crowd, and it's getting gentrified to shit. But like,
yeah,
there's loggers and hippies for the most part, is what this place was, up until about 10 years ago. And like, they'll come into where I work and tell me about your article. That like
yeah.
you got turned on to it by somebody who listens to somebody's show that you were on or knew, and yeah, dude, like there are people that are just regular people who know that they aren't represented by their government, who are coming around to independent media in a way that I haven't seen before, and I think that's really fucking cool.
Yeah, that is awesome if that is happening. But it looks like there's going to be another crackdown on social media for news because there's a meeting this Friday at the White House between all the social media companies and Trump. So I think, actually, and Bill Barr is there. And of course, Bill Barr is the attorney general, and he is a fixer for the Bush family and a former CIA guy. So don't expect that to go particularly well for independent media. Hopefully people will consider moving to another platform or will just sign up for newsletters or something like that. Because there's coming a time when it's not going to be so easy to get all this stuff from news feeds on Twitter or Facebook or things like that. I can't even use Facebook anymore. So I'm just on Twitter now.
I get that. Apparently my audio isn't coming in real quick. I'm going to, but yours is. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let you introduce part 3 of your series while I yank my producer away from the 2 Australians that are visiting him and get my shit figured out. But please take
Okay.
it away because you're coming in great, says the audience, and you're why they're here right now.
Okay. Um, okay, let me say it's like 20, it's like a 20-page report. So let me see where to start. So basically, if you read the first 2 parts of my series, I'm basically talking about this network that is a network of organized crime, the CIA, top government officials, and people that are sort of in between those worlds, people like Roy Cohn. I talk about Roy Cohn, who's Trump's mentor, and a lot of other things to a lot of other people, and was really close to the Reagan, people in the Reagan administration, all that, how he was running a sexual blackmail operation that exploited children like Jeffrey Epstein. And he was doing it with a mob connected businessman. And he was also, there was sort of there was in 1 and 2. That takes us to the beginning of part 3, where I introduce Ronald Lauder, who was also an official in the Reagan administration. He was deputy or I think assistant secretary of defense for NATO. And then he later became U.S. ambassador to Austria in the Reagan administration. And then after that, he's the billionaire heir to Estee Lauder. And Estee Lauder and that whole family, Ronald Lauder's whole family, is really close to Trump and Roy Cohn. That whole network I sort of described in the earlier chapters. and they had like dinner parties at his house and stuff. But they were definitely close. And Ronald Lauder is one of these figures that sort of segues, not just segues from this network and goes to what the meat of my piece is about, which is, you know, the mega group and all their ties to Israel and the Mossad and all of that. So Ronald Lauder is a member of the mega group as well. And so what is the mega group? The mega group is this sort of informal organization of these philanthropists, and they claim to only get together to discuss philanthropy. And some people believe that, and some people, you know, also believe, I guess, that Bilderberg is, you know, one of those times when the elite get together and they just discuss, you know, philanthropy too, or just normal stuff, and it doesn't have anything to do with, like, you know, any other ulterior motives there. So yeah, so anyway, the mega group is this mix of businessmen, and a lot of the businessmen, pretty much the most prominent ones, they all have ties to the same organized crime network. And I lay this out in my piece. So the people that co-founded it, so Ronald Lauder, I just mentioned, is connected to it, right? But beyond that, it was co-founded by Charles Bronfman, and I talked about the Bronfmans in part 1 of my series because they were one of these, you know, mob-connected families during Prohibition.
It's Sam Bronfman, right? Is the patriarch? And
yeah,
if I'm coming in now, please somebody let me, and Whitney's low too. So it's Sam Bronfman and then Edgar and Charles, and it wasn't a Bronfman wrapped up in the NXIVM cult thing too?
Yeah, Edgar Bronfman's daughters, Claire and Sarah, I believe, were very involved in the NXIVM cult, and they were bankrolling it. So this apparently runs in the family as well.
Jesus.
Well, and also, there was also an interesting case. I didn't put this in my article, but another of Edgar Bronfman's sons, Sam Bronfman, was supposed to be the heir to like the business and like take over the business from his father, but he didn't. It went to Edgar Bronfman Jr., and this was after Sam Bronfman was allegedly kidnapped. And then it was supposed to, it turned out that like the guys that were arrested for the kidnap said that they were colluding with Sam Bronfman to blackmail Edgar Bronfman. And so the two guys that allegedly kidnapped, the kidnapping charges were dropped. So apparently they didn't kidnap him, but they were still charged with extortion, but not Sam Bronfman. It wasn't, but the accomplices were, and they went to prison. So there was like another blackmail attempt in that family as well, which is kind of strange, but that didn't involve sex blackmail. Well, but it did involve the fact that Sam Bronfman was apparently the lovers of one of the guys that allegedly kidnapped him, and that was part of their plan to get money. I don't know, just that's another thing I didn't, there's a lot of stuff I didn't in the article because it's like 20 pages. But anyway, the Bronfmans and Sam Bronfman is really where this idea for the mega group came from, because he wanted, Sam Bronfman in the 30s, after Prohibition was over, he wanted like status and prestige. He wanted to be well respected. He wanted to be like a senator or something, and everyone looked at him and was like, oh, well, you have a lot of money, but you're with the mob. So he wanted to launder his reputation, and he sort of did that by getting involved in philanthropy, but specifically philanthropy for Zionist causes or for Jewish causes. Even though his family is like pretty secular, they're not very religious.
So like a reverse Kennedy. Where Joe Kennedy came out of bootlegging and was, you know, the hella Catholic, but got the sons in high government level positions, and it would. And I'm sorry to jump off the rails here real quick, but did you find throughout any of your research a connection to the Kennedy family and these guys from back in the day?
Well, like as far as the Kennedys being part of this, no. Actually, there's a lot of involvement in people that hated the Kennedys. So like Roy Cohn, for example, like Bobby Kennedy was like his sworn enemy. They hated each other, and they would like meet they would like see each other in the hallway and like get into a fight and like shove each other and stuff. They like did not get along at all. And people have told me, but I wasn't able to confirm this, that there was some sort of Roy Cohn involvement with this firm called Perm Index that was sort of, that people have said was involved in the Kennedy assassination in some way, but I couldn't confirm if Roy Cohn was on that board or not. So I didn't include that. So some people have said that there's that connection there, and I haven't into that. I'm trying to like focus on sexual blackmail stuff. If you're talking about a group of people like this and organized crime, I mean, they commit lots of crimes. That's what they do. That's their job. I kind of have to focus on those specific crimes that I'm looking at, right?
Yeah.
So I'm basically looking, you know, sexual blackmail operations and political influence, and like, and you know, and in this piece, more like spy scandals, things like that. I sort of get into some specific cases there, but in order to like include every crime that like these people committed over their lifetimes, I can't really do that on MintPress. So
fair enough. God, it's incredible. It's incredible to me. Not only how like this rolls back to Samuel Bronfman, but also to the National Crime Syndicate, and that when the mega group was founded, there were still people who were alive when Meyer Lansky was alive and had worked with, like, it's all...
Well, no, not quite. So the mega group was founded officially in like 1991,
right.
And Lansky died in 1983. But there was a lot of overlap.
No, but I mean, from back in the day.
In the mega group, they like knew each other. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to... I'm sorry if I was unclear. I wasn't trying to say that Lansky was a part of the mega group, but that people who had worked with previously... from back in the day.
Well, I would say the mega group is like the next generation, right? So like Lansky died in 1983, and a lot of his associates died well before then, right? But so an example of that is like one of the main guys in the mega group is this hedge fund manager named Michael Steinhardt. And his father was one of Mayor Lansky's friends and was his jewel fence. And he was basically the jewel fence for like just the Jewish mob, but the Italian mob and a bunch of other mobs in New York. So his son is in the mega group. So that's why I say it's sort of like an intergenerational thing. And then you have Sam Bronfman's sons, Edgar and Charles. And but you know, those aren't the only direct links that we have here. So like Leslie Wexner, for example, I lay out in my article that he was also connected to this, and this came out in a police report that the police chief ordered destroyed because he didn't like want to anger Leslie Wexner, basically. And it was never supposed to be released, but like 10 years later, after this murder happened, where Wexner was implicated, and he was tied to the mob, some reporter in Ohio like filed a public records request, and they accidentally sent him this police report that was never supposed to be released that said Leslie Wexner works with the mob.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's a win for transparency, even if it's by accident, it's still a win.
You know what, any way that we can get it, especially in this age of corporate social media censorship and cable television essentially being state television with a different spin on why you should be rooting for empire expansion and you know, genocide. It's independent media that is the only people that can really bring stories like this. We've walked away from any and all media coverage of Jeffrey Epstein, basically.
You mean in the mainstream?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's different. Actually, there are some stories that still come out, but it's just stuff like Jeffrey Epstein hoodwinked all these poor billionaires into giving him their money, and they didn't know what was going on. But Jeffrey Epstein was so manipulative and so good at what he was doing.
Who just wanted to give their money to a philanthropist, and, you know, they thought that, you know, on the surface it looked like a great organization, and that's all that these people ever had to do with it. Swearsies. It is. Yeah. Oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the guys or one of the billionaires they say that Epstein hoodwinked was Leslie Wexner, actually, which is absurd because Wexner gave Epstein control of his like you know, access to his billions or whatever in like 1987, and then he just like kept giving him more stuff, and apparently he didn't know, even when Epstein tried to like rape a woman at Wexner's house, and Wexner's private security wouldn't let the woman leave after she called the cops. They kept her there for like 12 hours. So please tell me how he didn't know what was going on. Oh, also, Wexner is the guy that gave Epstein the townhouse in New York for like $1.
That's right.
You know, it's right. And before he did, Wexner bought the house for like 13 million, a little more than that, like 13.2 million. And then he spent millions more decorating and furnishing it. But he also put in this super weird bathroom that was like lined with lead, so no like electronics could get in. And if you open the cabinet under the sink, there's like this phone, and there's all these TVs that are like, you know, filming different rooms in the house and stuff. So and he never lives in it. Wexner never lives in it. He lives there at the most for like 2 months. So he like sets all this up, spends all these millions, but like never lives in the house, and then just gives it to this guy that's handling all his money and tries to rape women in his house. And he doesn't know what's going on. Okay, New York Times, you have some explaining to do, but we all know what you're actually trying to do here. So.
Well, and that's I mean, that's an important point too, is the amount, the links that outlets like the New York Times or cable organizations are going to skew this narrative and provide cover for these people. And we know from Epstein's Black Book that there are members of the media who are mentioned in it.
Yeah, totally. Well, you know, this sort of goes back to what I touched on part 2 of this series, is that these people are super connected to mainstream media. So like Jeffrey Epstein, right? One of his best friends was Rupert Murdoch. And then he was super good friends with a bunch of the big name columnists of the day from the New York Times. He used to joke that Barbara Walters was his fiance. He was childhood friends and lifelong friends with the guy that owns Condé Nast magazines, which is the New Yorker, Vanity Fair, GQ, Esquire, and a bunch of other ones. You know, just to name a couple. And so that's like, I mean, if you want to go look at the first section of my second article, I mean, you can see them all laid out there. I mean, it's extensive. So like any sort of story that would come out about what was going on here at that time, they just would have, you know, there would have been a total attack on whoever tried to report about what was going on. So, you know, that's changed a little bit now and today. Now, you know, the establishment will just say MintPress is full of crazy conspiracy people. Or things like that, or we're fake news or whatever. That's what NewsGuard is for. Because after, you know, NewsGuard, so like Tulsi Gabbard shared an article that I wrote on Twitter like a month ago or something, and people were all saying, oh, but NewsGuard says that MintPress News is fake. But actually MintPress News, we did an expose on NewsGuard and how they're connected to like former secretaries of Homeland Security, all these government people, the former director of the CIA, and all this stuff. And we did this big expose on them that went viral and got coverage on like RT and all these other outlets or whatever. Yeah. And it made the CEOs really mad. Like after that came out, like one of the heads of NewsGuard was like in Europe at some forum, and he was like complaining about how there was negative coverage. He was like really angry. So, and then after that, you know, they gave us a red rating. I'm not really surprised. It was really dishonest. And we, you know, like expanded upon, you know, we in great detail described how the justification for giving us the red rating was like complete BS, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So it's just like really frustrating, but not surprising. But like, you know, if someone's like, hey, NewsGuard rated you red, and you're like, yeah, we're the organization that exposed them, and then they rated us after we exposed them. I mean, what do you expect them to do? Hopefully more people will, like, you know, figure it out.
And the thing, what makes no sense and yet perfect sense at the same time is why organizations like that are allowed to rate news agencies in the first place, B, out of retribution, and C, without people immediately seeing. That's fucking blatant bullshit. Like, it would make me want to gravitate towards that news agency. Like, they dragged you through the mud because you deserved it, and you turned around and said that they were terrible for pointing out that you deserve to be dragged through. Yeah, I'm gonna go see what they're up to. That's fantastic. Thank you for pointing that out. I want to circle back, and again, I had to drag Barry out. Did it get brought up that, what was his name, Robert Lauder? Through, like, no...
Ronald Lauder.
Pardon?
Ronald,
yeah, through, like, no
yeah.
skill whatsoever, was handed an incredible position in federal government.
Yeah, he served in a high-ranking position in the Department of Defense, even though he, up to that point, has only experienced his managing Estee Lauder, which sells makeup. So, yeah, that's how he got that. And it shouldn't really be surprising because, as I mentioned, he's really close to his family, and he himself are really close to Roy Cohn. And Roy Cohn was hugely influential in the Reagan administration. Like Roy Cohn's law partner and partner in crime, whatever, was like the head of Reagan's transition team in 1980. Ronald Lauder was super close to the Reagan family. Nancy Reagan was one of his most frequent callers, according to the lady, his like secretary that managed his switchboards back in the days when there were like switchboards for phones and stuff. She said that Nancy Reagan and Bill Casey, who was the CIA director under Reagan, were Roy Cohn's most frequent callers.
I was going to bring up Bill Casey.
Ronald Lauder get some like special treatment in the Reagan administration and get some cool, appointment that he didn't have any experience for, really shouldn't surprise him.
This is why the Democrats are never going to be able to go after the Purple Gang was a thing.
Right, so like Mo Dalitz and the separate, who was based in Ohio and was close to Lou Wasserman, who was started in Ohio and later moved to California and became head of like MTA and Universal. So that's like one group I talk about in part two a little bit. But they were associates of Mayor Lansky. This is a national crime syndicate, so like there's like branches and different parts. If you like look at the history of like Mayor Lansky and his operations and his associates, he sends like his close childhood friend and longtime associate before he was gunned down, Bugsy Siegel. He sends him out to Las Vegas to like set up casinos and stuff, right, even though they all started in New York, right? So like they spread out pretty early on. Mo Dalitz was involved in with the Bronfmans, ferrying, liquor from, the lakes and whatever from Canada over to the U.S. And so he was involved in that. And then you had the Detroit Purple Gang, which is a totally separate thing, but they were also associates, but they were associates in a different way. And someone said this to me after my article was published, but I didn't look into this, but another guy I sort of mentioned who was tangentially connected to Roy Cohn that I mentioned in the article that was a mega group guy was Lester Crown, who used to be head of General Dynamics, the weapons manufacturer.
Right.
Apparently his family, the Crown family, was part of a national crime syndicate, a crime syndicate in Chicago. But I didn't look into that specifically on him. But the more you look at these mega group guys, it's really not that difficult to find mob ties for most of them. So one guy that's interesting too, that was in the mega group, the guy that's connected, that used to be a bag man or whatever for the Detroit Purple Gang, is this guy in Detroit, Max Fischer. And he actually founded the precursor to the Republican Jewish Coalition, which when he founded it was the National Jewish Coalition. If you don't know what that is, it is the most powerful Republican neoconservative pro-Israel lobby group in the U.S. That's where like Sheldon Adelson is and Bernard Marcus. Those are Trump's like top two donors. And Paul Singer's on there and like a bunch of, this is pretty much where a lot of the big, the big guys that are influencing the Republican Party specifically are right now. So, it's not just that these people like have money and they're philanthropists and they have mob ties. They're very politically influential as well.
And so, never mentioned when, I'm sorry to interrupt, but they're never mentioned when donor money is tossed around. Like only AIPAC is mentioned, or what is it, like PUFI or like they're CUFI.
Kofi, yeah.
Yeah, but those groups are mentioned, but not the one that you're talking about. Like it's just not disclosed.
Well, sometimes the Republican Jewish Coalition does come up, and people like John Bolton and people like that go and they give speeches there. But they don't get as much attention as other people could, or as other groups do, considering their influence. They're super influential and they have tons of money. Like some of the biggest, pretty much most of the biggest donors in the Republican Party are all part of that. And it's definitely, if you don't know what it is, just Google it. You'll find a lot of information about where, you know, how influential they are and how they make or break candidates in the Republican Party, like the Republican primary. In the last cycle, you know, it was a big fight between Rubio, Cruz, and Trump to try and get the money from the Republican Jewish coalition, who were like the kingmakers when it comes to, the Republican primaries, to be honest. And eventually Trump, you know, got, you know, the support because Sheldon Adelson favored him at one point, because all these guys previously had put their money on Rubio, and after Rubio had to drop out, they put it on Cruz, and then Adelson sort of moved them all to Trump, and they were not disappointed. A lot of Trump's policies that he's implemented when it comes to foreign policy have, you know, come, a lot of them have come directly from Adelson, who calls Trump almost every day, according to Alan Dershowitz, who has done legal work for Trump and for Adelson. Says that Trump takes his calls all the time. He calls almost every day. There's been reporting from a ton of outlets basically confirming that the decision to move to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel was done because Adelson was getting really impatient, and Trump had promised to do it, and he like urged him to do it. As soon as possible, was getting angry, was going to revoke money, cutting off, the funding for the refugee organization in Palestine, also an Adelson move, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So. And the Trump administration has also done political favors for some Adelson companies and for some companies that are friends of Adelson. So, I mean,
is the Kushner family one of those families? Like, is that why Jared's given those policies? Like, is that at the behest of Sheldon Adelson or anyone on the National Jewish Council? Because it seems like I know his family's involved in brokering settlements. I know that.
Well, they're involved in that, but they're not part. I don't know them to be part of the Republican Jewish coalition, no. But I know that, Jared Kushner, he's married into the Trump family basically through Ivanka, right? So I think that's part of why that is. But they're that religious sort of extremist circle that supports extreme settlements and some of the most extreme settlements in the entire West Bank. Like the Kushners, David Friedman, who's the U.S. ambassador to Israel, is also part of that group. They're very influential in the administration. Jason Greenblatt, the other peace negotiator, used to guard a West Bank settlement, used to live in one, used to guard one with an AK-47. So he's the guy trying to negotiate peace with Palestine right now. Friedman and the Kushners have funded some really insane settlements. One of them, I think, is called Itzhar, and there they have a yeshiva, a religious school that's called Od Yosef Chai, and the rabbis that run that wrote a book called The King's Torah, where they said it's legitimate to kill a Palestinian baby if we have reason to believe he will grow up and do harm to us. So that's the type of extreme ideology that, Kushner and Friedman and these people are supporting, in private at least. And the fact that they were given, the Trump administration gave them like leeway to negotiate peace with Palestine is just really absurd. And also, you had Adelson and Friedman, under Jerusalem, not that far from the Dome of the Rock.
Yeah.
With sledgehammers, like sledgehammering away at the foundations of, Palestinian homes that are above there in occupied Jerusalem, which is actually, that the destruction of the foundations of those homes for tunnels and stuff, it's led to like random sinkholes and random building collapses in the past. So, I mean, it's just a mess, but we're getting a little off topic there.
Yeah.
Anyway,
we can use that to talk about Shimon Peres and his association with this whole deal too.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I was going to say one more thing about Max Fischer, who's the guy that created what became the Republican Jewish Coalition. He was an advisor on Middle East affairs to like tons of presidents, starting with Eisenhower. And he died in 2003 or something. I don't know. He lived a really long time and was like advisors to a lot of people. I think he even worked with Henry Kissinger on like Middle East stuff. So like this is a guy that had a huge amount of influence. And so anyway, my point was that like people in the mega group are super politically influential, and they have a lot of, so they're like big political donors, but they're not just political donors in the US where they have a lot of influence, which we just talked about in our sort of like off topic discussion, whatever. So, but they're also major donors to Israel. So for people that don't know, the foreign donors in Israel are hugely influential. Like I think in I think it was 2009 was the prime minister election back then, but it was either 2009 or 2010. But Netanyahu in that cycle, according to, I think it was some Israeli media outlet, they said that 98% of his donations came from foreigners. Can you imagine that going on in the U.S. and people like not being freaked out? You know, can you imagine Joe Biden, people being like, 98% of his donations come from Ukraine or something? And it would be like a huge deal. You would think, but that's just how it is in Israel, because there's so many people in the diaspora, right? Or so there's a lot of people with dual citizenship, and so a lot of people give that don't give to Israeli politicians that don't necessarily live in Israel, right?
There's members of Congress that have Israeli citizenship.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
Like 35 or 37 of them. I don't.
Well, I mean,
I don't know how that can be a thing.
That is Jewish can apply to be a citizen of Israel pretty much and be granted, citizenship just based on, whether they can prove Jewish ancestry or whatever. So and that law has actually been abused quite a bit. So a lot of people that are, being pursued for crimes in their home countries apply to live in Israel, and Israel lets them come, things like that. That's been sort of controversial domestically in Israel, and also abroad, obviously, for people that want extradition of certain criminals and whatnot. So it's a bit of a thorny issue. But yeah, it's pretty, I think, from what I understand, pretty normal to have dual citizenship and live in Israel. A lot of people weren't born there, some were, but a lot of them were not.
Tie in any way into the mega spy scandal that you discuss in the article?
Well, dual nationality, no. But so going back to the mega group, the point I was trying to make is that this is, they're very influential politically in two countries, right? And they also have connections to intelligence. Some of the people in them, they have connections to intelligence in both countries. As I mentioned, the Meyer Lansky mob, right, or that network, they had a lot of ties to U.S. intelligence. I also pointed out, talking about Ronald Lauder, that he co-founded a company with the guy that founded NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, which is seen as being an extension of the CIA, right? So there's sort of connections in there. And then he was part of the Roy Cohn thing that had all those connections to Bill Casey and whatever. So you have that on one side, and then on the other side, you have the fact that these guys, a lot of these mega group guys are responsible for, were major donors to a lot of Israeli prime ministers. Ronald Lauder, for example, is basically credited with agencies work in Israel is a little different than they work in the U.S., right? So there's not as many intelligence agencies in Israel as there are in the U.S. The U.S. is like 17?
Yeah.
And a lot of...
Yeah.
Right. And so Israel has way less. I forget exactly how many, but it's under 10. And they answer directly to the prime minister. But when we think of intelligence in the U.S., it's sort of like, does the intelligence answer to the president, or does the president answer to the intelligence agencies? It's more like the intelligence agencies are sort of seen as being like separate from the president, or being rogue, or being, if you're not as familiar with how the CIA works as some people, I think a lot of people at least view it as being more independent than it would be in Israel. So the fact that these guys, would bankroll a particular candidate and maybe ask for favors, which happens with in any democracy or whatever, the big donors often go and they ask for favors afterwards, right? Yeah. If you go and ask for ask the new prime minister that you funded to ask the Mossad to do something, as an example, that's not that unusual. And if you even look at the history of the CIA, right?
Yeah.
There's a history of the CIA doing major covert operations on the behalf of oligarchs. So as an example, when they first started overthrowing governments in the early 50s, they were doing it not for national security reasons, they were doing it for corporations. Like they overthrew the Guatemalan government for United Fruit Company. They overthrew the government in Iran for Anglo-American oil, right? So, intelligence agencies have a history of doing stuff to favor oligarchs. So basically, what I'm trying to paint there is that the mega group is not only influentially politically in both countries, but they also have ties to intelligence in both countries as well. And there's more direct ties to the Mossad that I also go into that I go into a little more in the article. So as an example, Ronald Lauder like founded a school, or like yeah, he like funded a university in Israel where the Mossad is like that's where they recruit all their students from, and he like funded like a third of it or something.
Oh, so
there's like some other
like America's Ivy League. America's Ivy League institutions, particularly Harvard and Yale, are supposed to be like ground zero for intelligence agency recruitment.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm not familiar exactly with what universities the CIA uses in the U.S., but okay. I'm talking about IDC Erlizia in Israel. I don't know how to pronounce it. But basically, you know, and there's some other ties like that in the piece, right? But then, you know, what you were talking about, the mega spy scandal, there was a story in 1997 where there was this intercepted phone call that was intercepted by the NSA, and then it was later passed to the FBI. And it was between two Mossad officials. One was based in the U.S., and he was talking to his commander, his superior in Israel. And he said, hey, the Israeli ambassador here wants me to get the sensitive government document. I want to go and try and get it from Mega, is what he said. So like the code name was Mega, and his superior said, oh, this isn't something we use Mega for. And so this like made all this, freaked out a bunch of people in Washington because they thought there was another Israeli spy in the U.S., like Jonathan Pollard, who is the most well-known Israeli spy. One that was really convicted. I mean, there have been other ones, but they just sort of get sent back, and it's no big deal. Like the one that spied on NASA, he just went back to Israel and didn't get charged. But so there was so people were worried that there was this you know spy in the government, and they were looking for an individual, right? But there's a lot of compelling evidence that they were actually it wasn't an individual. It might as well been a group or an organization. And then it comes out a few months later, well, actually like almost a year to the day that the spy scandal broke. The Wall Street Journal has like this random piece, which is the first media report on the mega group, even though the mega group was founded in 1991. They say, oh, this mega group was founded. It's all these philanthropists that happen to be super politically influential and tied to intelligence in both countries. That's so weird.
And that's the first media report on the mega group is in 1998?
Yeah.
Wow. That.
So 7 years after it was founded. And they talk about, they're the ones that say it was founded in 1991 by Leslie Wexner and Charles Bronfman. That's all the Wall Street Journal, and that came out in May of 1998.
Wow.
And the spy scandal broke in May of 1997.
Right. So they had to celebrate the anniversary without calling attention to it. Like the subtlest gifts are always the nicest kind of thing. I don't.
Maybe. I mean, that's speculation, so I'm not.
You're right. That is speculation. But it was funny, so I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean that's fine.
No, the spy. I mean, the spy story is fascinating because you call attention to it in the article that it broke. It was this big deal in the Washington Post for like a minute, and then just went away entirely.
It went away, and the investigation by the FBI and the NSA was shut down. So like this, the Mossad tried to explain, being like, no, that's our code word for the CIA. But the guy that originated that claim was a former Mossad official, Rafi Aden, who was Jonathan Pollard's handler, and the media believes him and is like, oh, that must be right. I totally believe you. So I note in my piece that that makes it quite dubious. His excuse. So on the other hand, too, we also know the mega group had business partnerships with two individuals who were known Mossad agents who were also businessmen. I only talk about one in this piece. The last piece, what I hope to be the last piece, because I need to start work on other stuff too, is the one I didn't write about is Mark Rich. So I'll get into him later.
Wow.
If you don't know who he is.
No, wow. All right.
Right. Well, he got pardoned by Clinton in Clinton's last days of office. It was really controversial. A lot of people involved in the mega group or close to Epstein were the people that put you know, a lot of pressure on Clinton to issue that pardon, even though it was something Clinton didn't want to do because it caused unnecessary like harm to his political reputation, because the guy was like so notorious and just not good and a total Mossad hack, really. And he was, you know, a fugitive from the law for like, in the US anyway, for like almost 30 years or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I remember, man. I do. I'm 41. I was like media aware and politically aware from the I recognized it mostly as bullshit. So when shit like that happened, I tried to pay attention to it, and I remember you know, people were laying out a lot of facts about Mark Rich that I don't know if we would see that in media today. I don't know if we would see the kind of basic, like, and it's the Washington Post article that you mentioned in your story. Like, I'm sure it's been sanitized, but there's a little bit more truth in it than what they're putting out these days. Like Montel Williams used to have Gary Webb on his show, and Mark Levine. Like, I just saw this clip the other day of Gary Webb on Montel Williams in daytime television talking about cocaine trafficking by the CIA.
I wouldn't expect that today. I mean, look, like, I don't live in the U.S. Anymore, but I have been told that on daytime television, the big, like, political talk show in the morning is now The View, right? And that has John McCain's daughter and, like, the daughter who's a journalist now, but her father was, like, involved in, like, a bunch of the shady Reagan stuff in Central America, like in the 80s. And there's just, like, all these people that, like, how are they the people that are in charge of political discourse in the U.S.? That's messed up.
Because it's state television. I mean, I've honestly been on the front end, and now I'm gonna work until I die. So I did all of the international travel and allegedly participating in semi-illegal activities in Grateful Dead parking lots and other concert parking lots, allegedly.
Yeah.
You know, and I did all that shit, and now I'm here. And it's kind of weird. It really is to retire first, but I'm getting way the fuck off track there. But no, that was a result of killing my television.
I can bring us back. So I was talking about how they were connected to two known Mossad agents that were also businessmen, right? So the first one is Mark Rich, and the second one is Robert Maxwell, of course. And I talk about him here mainly because Robert Maxwell's daughter is Ghislaine Maxwell, who is the girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein, but according to victims, she was the procurer of girls for Epstein, and she was his madam, and she trained the girls in activities, I guess you could say, and she also raped some of these girls, according to the victims. Anyway, the fact that her father was a Mossad agent is pretty interesting, and so I talk about some of the different things that he was known to have done for the Mossad. So, for example, he was known to be a media mogul, right? He sort of developed a media empire. He wanted to compete directly with Rupert Murdoch, but failed and had like this bitter rivalry. Where he was always like, he's so much better than me. I have to buy more stuff from him. And he always sort of failed at that. But interestingly enough, some of his media acquisitions in the the UK, were actually bankrolled by the Mossad. They came from people from Israel, or billionaires in Israel that were directly linked to the Mossad. And so he basically bought some of his media assets, like the Daily Mirror, in that whole media group. He bought that with Mossad money, right? And he later, basically like took money out of the pensions of the workers of that, and he used it to bankroll Mossad activities and try to keep his own empire afloat that he was mismanaging, because he was mismanaging it because he was using money from that organization to fund Mossad's the European activities of the Mossad during that time. Another thing he did that I talk about in the article is the Promise software, and Promise is sort of it even has a similar name, but it's often described as sort of like the forerunner to Prism. which a lot of people know from like the Edward Snowden leaks and all of that, that was that sort of like surveillance software, track everyone and track communication. It was like a people tracking software, basically, is what Thomas was.
Right.
And so originally, the original company that leased this to the government and had developed it or whatever was this company called Inslaw. They leased it to the Department of Justice in the early 80s, and that allowed the Department of Justice to more effectively prosecute money laundering cases. And this apparently upset a bunch of people in the Reagan administration. I wonder why. Because of Iran-Contra, right? I think we all know why they might have been upset about that, right? So anyway, an envoy for Reagan to Iran in the early 80s, who had previously been an aide and has served as a cabinet minister when Ronald Reagan was governor of California, named Earl Bryan. He had developed a friendship with the same guy I mentioned earlier, who was Jonathan Pollard's handler, Rafi Eitan. Or Aton, or whatever. Yeah, and so basically Brian went and was like complaining about how this software sucked for him the way it was being used, and he was describing some stuff about it. And obviously, if you're saying that to like at the time, so like Aton wasn't working for the Mossad, because remember the Mossad is just one part of Israel's intelligence apparatus. It's the one that does stuff outside of Israel. It's not a domestic agency. So like the domestic spy agency is like Shin Bet or whatever. And the one else is the Mossad. And there was one that existed during this time, but it doesn't exist anymore. And it's called Lakim, that was sort of like focused on science and technical espionage, specifically related to the Israel's covert secret nuclear program.
Right.
Right.
No, it's hilarious that you laugh and use air quotes when you do, because I do that too. When discussing their secret nuclear program, it's just you.
Yeah, well, I mean, they claim it. They won't comment on it officially, but it was exposed by a whistleblower whose name is Beninu Mordecai. People knew before too, but actually Mordecai was partially caught because Maxwell is the guy that told the Mossad to go after him. It's a long story. But anyway, Maxwell was involved in the kidnapping of Beninu Mordecai as well. So anyway, going back to the Promise software, this guy from the Reagan administration basically hatched a plan with the guy of a foreign intelligence agency to put a backdoor benefiting the foreign intelligence agency into the software and then sell it not just to the U.S. government, but the entire world. So that's nuts. And that guy never went to prison for treason.
Jesus.
Yeah. Eventually got in trouble for like fraud in the early 90s, but for like this insane act of it's like clearly treason.
Yeah.
He didn't get it. Yeah.
Man, yeah. Whoa, it's so cartoonish.
So anyway, going on, this guy, Earl Bryan, he made, in order to sell this, bug software, well, originally they were going to try and buy out Inslaw, the original company, and Inslaw said no. So then Earl Bryan set up an electronics company, and he got his friend, who happened to be Attorney General at the time, Ed Meese, who stopped paying Inslaw per the contract, bankrupting Inslaw and allowing this other company to come in and sell the software that was bugged.
And Ed Meese is
Ed Meese's wife was invested in Earl Bryan's company.
Of course she was. Ed Meese is one of the most just darkest figures out of that whole time period, just in the way that his thought process worked. Ed Meese is was a terrible, terrible human being. What's the... So
let me explain how this connects to Maxwell really quick. So basically, Earl Bryan was successful in selling to some countries, but because his company was American, not all of the foreign governments wanted to buy from American. They were like, maybe the CIA did something to this. So Rafi Eitan then goes to Robert Maxwell, who he knew and he was close to also. By the way, Rafi Eitan also did stuff with Mayor Lansky. Also, they had a direct association. Unsurprising.
Because why wouldn't they?
Right. So he asked Robert Maxwell basically to be a salesman for this software, and he did it really successfully. And he even got the Russian government and Russian intelligence, the KGB, to start using it. So basically, the Mossad and Israeli intelligence, more broadly speaking, because this is one intelligence agency that put the back door in, but I mean they intelligence share through agencies in the same country, right? So basically, Israeli intelligence had access to like all of the most secure databases of countries like all over the world from at least 1983 up through the 90s until it was sort of exposed that the trapdoor or backdoor was there.
Wow.
So that's nuts. Yeah.
And I mean that explains the necessity of having an international blackmail sex trafficking ring.
Well, so like basically Israel, by doing this, like if the CIA had any of this blackmail like uploaded digitally that it had acquired for its own purposes, or any other intelligence agency, or if they had it online in any of these databases that were linked up to this software, which combed through all these different databases, right? That's like why it was revolutionary at the time. Or part of the reason anyway. So the Mossad had access to all of that. It basically got access to like all the blackmail of like the world, basically. I mean, there were some countries that didn't use this, right? I don't want to say every country used it, but it was a lot. And they sold it at a profit. They made like hundreds of millions of dollars selling this to people. Like, look how great the software is, but it's bugged for Israel. So it was a master crime, dude.
That is fucking insane, man. And that's 15 years worth of data harvesting, blackmail data harvesting.
Yeah, and other data. I mean, who knows what they took, right?
But I'm not trying
corporations, to... Corporations also use this software. Some of them did anyway. So that's also could have been used for like economic espionage to benefit certain countries, for example. So it's just a mess.
That is that's a ridiculous amount of influence to be able to have, because there's I mean, if that's including KGB data too, that's just you can predict defections that way. You can alter the course of history with that kind of shit. Without people ever knowing that it was you. It's incredible to think of the potential for misuse.
Right. Well, what's crazy is that after this was discovered, Israel didn't like losing their dragnet backdoor into everything, so they made new companies that did that same thing. And one of those companies is called Amdocs. And I'll be getting that into the last part of my piece a little bit. Because Amdocs, they were implicated in a lot of Israeli espionage in the United States in the 90s. Okay. Because they were a private telecommunications company in Israel, and they were accused with in their installed infrastructure and sort of giving data that passed through all these phone lines and stuff, that they were sending it also back home, right, to Israeli intelligence. And this comes up a lot for people that look into either the Monica Lewinsky scandal, because Netanyahu somehow price was right. You know what I mean? So I think it happened. It probably happened that way, or a mix of other things. I mean, who knows? But basically, this allegedly, according to the sources that say that talk about this, say that it had to do with Netanyahu trying to apply pressure to Clinton in terms of like Israeli-Palestine peace negotiation stuff, and that's also the document that the mega spy that they were in that scandal, they were trying to get a document related to that, like Clinton was president also. So there was definitely a lot of Netanyahu espionage aggressively targeting the United States during that time. And also, with also a scandal, it's a lot of people don't know about it anymore, but it's often referred to as the Israeli art student spy scandal.
Right. Where
all these Israelis, young Israelis that were like coupled up or just by themselves, they said they were art students.
22,
and they were selling this crappy art or whatever, and they were going around, but they weren't going around as just like any building. They were going around to like the houses of people that worked for the DEA or like the government, and they would go to like government facilities and be like, would you buy my art, please? And they would try and like get in to like, I don't know. I don't want to get too much into it.
Well, hang on, because real quick, I worked for briefly like a multi-level marketing scam company that sold framed artwork building to building, and we would go in and do that and hit up people to buy framed artwork, and that would like we weren't, or at least I wasn't a member of an intelligence agency. But
right, but it was very specific. It was like the specific strategy to like use pretend to be an art student to get access to these facilities and like confirm, like in the case of these people's houses, you would have these art students go and try and confirm the identity of these government people working for like the DEA or whoever at their houses, and then there would be like a company like Amdocs that would like come to the neighborhood and redo the comms in the neighborhood and stuff like that.
No, and it was, I remember that too. There was more than 20 of them, right? That they hemmed up on, like 22, 21.
I forget how many, but it was a lot, and they were I think a lot of them ended up being deported. But I mean, this basically came out of a bunch of internal government memos that were leaked, I think the late 90s, early 2000s, about how inside like the DEA specifically, which was the most targeted, that like they were like internally really freaked out by how frequent these art students would visit, and how the art students like were high-ranking members of like military or intelligence in Israel. They were really young, right? Or like their parents were like part of the upper class, and it was weird for them to be like, like hippie art students trying to sell stuff. Like they had a lot of reasons to be.
Right. It didn't. Yeah. So, it didn't. I remember. I remember reading some of the. I think it was they had to go FOIA on that, and there was a FOIA release.
Well, there was one that came out in the press earlier, and I think there were some other FOIA ones that came out later. But I haven't written about that recently, so I prefer not to like. Sure. Talk about something I haven't researched recently, because I've been dealing with a lot of information lately, so my brain can mix things up. I'm only human, right? So
I know, I get it. I do. I try to I strive for accuracy, but I also understand that I have a lot of shit going on, and sometimes my memory of what happened a couple of months ago is a little mixed around. So I'm with you on that.
Okay. Well, anyway, I was bringing up Amdocs because I was saying this was a phase after Promise, right? So I would argue, well, I mean, I've written about this before the Epstein thing, that I argue that there is a new phase of this going on, and it involves all these tech startups that are created by former members of Israel's military intelligence unit, or its hacker unit, or whatever you want to call it. It's NSA, the NSA of Israel, which is known as Unit 8200. Which has been creating a lot of startups with money from top American neocons that actually set up a giant think tank to promote tech startups run by Unit 8200 guys. That was like Paul Singer, who's this neocon billionaire in the U.S., gave that like $20 million. Wow. So I've reported on this recently, and basically they get that money combined with money from Israel's government, because this is actually part of Netanyahu's anti-BDS strategy, is to get make all of these, startups with Unit 8200 guys, and then have them sort of get gobbled up by all the tech giants in the U.S. and other countries, and forcing them to like incorporate or move aspects of their business to Israel, thereby making it very difficult to boycott a company that does business in Israel, by making them sort of indispensable to the technological sector that the world economy depends on. So that, and this isn't me just conspiracy mongering. Netanyahu says this himself. He's like, this is a deliberate policy. This is what I'm doing. So one of these companies that set up 8200 companies that are like Black Cube, like NSO that makes that Pegasus software or whatever, that's like that Mohammed bin Salman uses to spy on people, and all these dictators use to spy on people. I mean, that comes from people that from this kind of startup, right? And it's really extensive if you look at it. So basically, talking about it in general, so like Microsoft is one of the companies that has absorbed most, like a huge number of these tech startups. And actually, their entire cloud operation is now based in Israel and run by a guy that used to work for Unit 8200. So that's crazy to remember, or crazy to think of, when you consider that currently there are two companies competing for the JEDI contract, the cloud contract at the Pentagon,
right.
and they're Amazon and they're Microsoft. And that's cloud computing, and Microsoft may win that. And all of Microsoft's cloud computing is based in a foreign country and run by a former member of military intelligence for that foreign country. That would normally set off red flags at the Pentagon, but apparently it's not. But anyway, another example is that a lot of these tech startups, they get all this money and they get connected to investors, and they basically get set up for success, right? By several different companies that act as incubators for these companies. And so one of these, as an example, is called Team 8. And it was founded by a former commander of Unit 8200. One of its main investors was Eric Schmidt, who's a former CEO of Google.
Right.
And they recently hired Mike Rogers, the former director of the NSA, to be a strategic advisor. And all these NSA employees got really angry, and they said that, oh, they're not hiring him to advise on anything. They're advising him because he knows how all the systems in the U.S. work. I mean, that's nuts, dude. Let's remember, just a few years ago, the NSA itself, I think it was 2013, they were saying that Israel is the most aggressive espionage threat the United States faces after China and Russia, right? So this isn't just oh, they're our allies, so it's cool. But we also, the government's admitted that they aggressively spy on us. So, I mean, there's definitely a conflict of interest here, and it's not normal. And it's also pretty weird that Epstein was funding one with a former prime minister of Israel, and also the other funder, one of the main investors there was Peter Thiel. He was an American, a co-founder of PayPal, and the guy that made Palantir, which is that creepy pre-crime software.
Yeah. I was going to kind of tie Palantir in with that, because it's basically the sister organization almost a mirror image of the one that you were talking about out of Israel. And Peter Thiel is just he's a very, very studying that guy, at least through the eyes of Barrett Brown, has been a trip.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Barrett Brown has done great reporting pretty consistently on Palantir and why they're horrible. So
I'm trying to get him on the show to talk about it. He wants to go to really famous media outlets first, which I understand.
Yeah, that's fine. But anyway, so this company, like I said, it's funded by, or it was founded by Unit 8200. It's funded by these people. Its advisory board has Michael Chertoff on it, who's a former Secretary of Homeland Security. And it has an ex-employee of Palantir who is the head of the DOD aspect of Trump's transition team, like Department of Defense, the Pentagon part of Trump's transition team, basically picking who's Secretary of Defense and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So that guy's on the advisory board too. And then on the board of directors of this company is a Trump donor that's a New York real estate developer named Elliot Tawil. So it's really crazy that this is sort of this mix of New York, and sort of military industrial complex people, because remember, Palantir is a U.S. Government contractor, right? I should have mentioned that.
Yeah.
So you have sort of this combination of the U.S. security state, and then you have Israeli military intelligence, Epstein, and a former prime minister of Israel who has long-standing ties to Israeli intelligence, and he used to be a minister of defense himself.
Well, and if Michael Chertoff's involved too, it's not. I think it's public record that both the Chertoff's parents were Mossad, and he's got this.
His mother, I think his mom was one, but I don't.
Okay. He's got the Chertoff group, which is basically like a cesspool of empire expansion.
Yeah.
And
well, it's also a cesspool of companies for the police state, right?
Yeah.
So this company I'm talking about that Epstein co-funded and all of that is very police state-like. We'll get into that for a sec. But speaking of Chertoff, his Chertoff group, for example, one of their top clients is OSI Systems, which I think is that like body scanner thing they want to put in public places because of public safety threats and all that stuff. So he has like a vested interest in people feeling unsafe, basically, of business. I also used to be like chairman of the board of BAE Systems, which is the biggest weapons manufacturer in Europe, I think. So. Yeah, he gets around, huh?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. No, there must be like war criminal merit badges that they pass out to each other, and then that's how you.
They give each other medals all the time. They just don't call it. I mean, like the Presidential Medal of Freedom should basically be renamed that.
That's true. That's true. That's true. The war.
Because like the officials say that about Bolton. They actually have been. There's been former Israeli high-ranking officials in Israel's government that are like freaked out by how Bolton betrays U.S. national interest on a regular. Well, when he was in the UN or whatever, that he like worked counter to U.S. national security interests in favor of Israel and his own personal agenda, which is war with the Iran. That he was like trying to go behind the State Department's back when he was at the State Department and was intentionally like trying to undermine Colin Powell, who was then Secretary of State. He took all these to Israel without approval to try and like undermine, and it was just a mess. So yeah, he got his cool medals.
Defender of Zion. That's just, God, that ought to raise every red flag that is available. You know, it really should. I know you don't have that much time left. So let me go back to this company. Sorry, we keep getting sidetracked today. But basically, this company is important to point out because of what it does, too. So now that we've laid out the connections and how that seems really odd and strange, just wait till you hear what this company is about. So it's called Carbine. It used to be called Reporty, but they changed the name. And its logo is like super weird. It's basically a rotating eye. It's kind of creepy. But basically, and you'll see why. It's marketed as an emergency response system that basically gets installed on all the emergency service provider infrastructure of like local 911 call centers and things like that. But you also have to put it on your phone. And so when you call 911 from your phone with the app installed, it gives the emergency service providers access to your exact location. It gives them a video feed, access to your camera, all this stuff. So to make you like feel safer, and it will reduce, they say it'll, reduce, the time it takes for emergency services to get to you. And they're specifically marketing this software as a way of preventing mass shootings as well. So that's interesting, given what's been going on lately. Yeah. You don't say.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. So basically, this same app, a version of it, it's not the same company, but an app analogous to it was mandated to be installed in some areas of China by the government, and as a way to like make people feel safer. And it was marketed as emergency response, but actually once it was on people's phones, it came out that the Chinese government was using it as a tool of mass surveillance and using it to group people based on like what their political affiliation or their religious group or whatever. They were using it to like classify people and spy on whatever people did, because if this application has access to your microphone and your camera and your location and all of that, when you call 911, it technically has access to it all the time.
Yeah. And
do we really want to trust a company that has all these connections to Unit 8200, which developed like Stuxnet and all this malware that's like, it is like really bad, and does espionage and signal intelligence? I mean, do we really want to trust a company funded by Epstein and the Palantir guy?
Absolutely. It's thank you for doing the work on this, because you won't find anybody that can just rattle off the information, or go to the detail that you've gone to draw these connections and show these connections backed with evidence, and it is, as you just said, it's I can't imagine anybody wanting any of those systems on their devices, on their phones. Even if it's how you get help, you should be able to get help without letting intelligence agencies have access to all of what's in your phone and your location at all times. That's just Orwellian and creepy.
Right. Well, what happens when, there's enough mass shootings and the government's response is, oh, everyone has to download this app on their phone, right? I mean, how far away are we from that day? I mean, after the El Paso shooting and all of that, now we're having Bill Barr working with social media companies to get the back door into encryption that he's wanted. And he actually gave a speech less than 2 weeks before the shooting where he said, get ready for a major event or major incident that could happen any day now that will galvanize public opinion around my super unpopular anti-encryption policy. And then all these shootings start.
Joaquin Castro comes out and tweets out a list of Trump supporters, and immediately the narrative on media is, see, this is why you shouldn't be able to find out who donates to political campaigns. And
right.
Yeah.
So it's getting nuts. But anyway, Trump's response to the shooting is not just, work with social media companies and get end encryption and all this stuff. It's pre-crime crap.
Yeah.
It's like we have to find the shooter before he strikes. So if you say things that are like, I don't know, like the ADL says you're an anti-Semite, which is basically anytime you criticize Israel for the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Because they're basically known to be like a branch of the pro-Israel lobby. They're not that much different from AIPAC, honestly.
Yeah.
So if they're calling the shots, right, and you can be they'll oh, but because you criticize Israel, you might commit a hate crime. I mean, I really hope those days aren't coming upon us, but it's starting to look really.
We just saw that
really
leaked
nuts.
FBI document that is tying conspiracy theories to white domestic terrorism.
Right. I don't think any of this timing is really a coincidence.
I don't.
If Bill Barr gives anything, he said that for them to use it and to use the law to enforce this new policy. So.
Yes. And we're. I'm gonna have back on the show Sean O'Brien from the Yale Privacy Lab. He's getting ready to launch an outfit called Privacy Safe. They conduct seminars on how to best encrypt your things and whatnot, and I think that
but if Bill Barr gets his way,
there's going to be a backdoor into it, and that's why I want to have him on, because I want to figure out if there's something about Privacy Safe that's going to push that away or prevent it in any way, shape, or form, because I think it's a question worth asking. Whitney, I know you got to run. I got to run too. I want to thank you so much for your time. If there's anything you wanted to close on or anything specific about how this relates to the Jeffrey Epstein case, go ahead and
I think that was okay. Well, I think that stuff about Carbine is a pretty good place to end it. And that's pretty much where the report ends. The only thing I will say is that I think stay tuned for what I hope to be the last part of my series, which is going to be on Mark Rich and the Clintons and Lynn Forrester, the Rothschild, and all of those people and how they fit in. And going into some of what we touched on today with Amdocs and the Witney scandal and all of that, that will be making an appearance, ending with the Mark Rich pardon. So I'm hoping that'll be the last, but I don't want to go all the way into 2000, all the 2000s and that. I'm just going to leave it there.
Or is this going to just be are you going, I know the people who suggested it, are you just going to put this out as a book when you're done? Like kind of fine tune a little bit or expect, because that would be an absolutely fascinating read, and I would definitely pick it up. Thank you so much for your time.
I'd have to crowdfund it.
Yeah.
But anyway, you can to wrap up really quick, please follow me on Twitter or MintPress News. Please sign up for our newsletter. I have a feeling we're going to be deplatformed any day now. I'm also looking at a new social media platform that's sort of like YouTube and Twitter together, I like so far, because some of the other ones like Minds and Steam, they feel like blogs, and I write so much I don't feel like blogging too. On top of it, I don't really have time. So if you're on there, you can look me up. And yeah, that's about it. So I'll have hopefully the last installment out in another week or two, depending on what other stuff I have to cover. So and MintPress has some big stuff in the works besides the Epstein case. So stay tuned and follow us.